If they can't tell you who won on election day, then it's fair for one to assume the election is compromised. Big election news this week in California, and the news isn't so much who won, because we don't know who won. The news is that the election systems in California are collapsing in terms of public confidence. It is because, as Judicial Watch has long pointed out, in California they take forever and a day to find out who won on election day. And in many ways, it's in violation of law, at least if there are federal elections at issue, as Judicial Watch is now litigating before the Supreme Court. In fact, thanks to a Judicial Watch lawsuit that was successful in Mississippi, at least at the appellate level, the Supreme Court is going to decide whether it is lawful to count ballots that arrive late after Election Day. And in California, one of the big issues is they allow ballots to get in for up to 7 days after Election Day and get counted. Now, whether that would be ended under this Supreme Court ruling as we expect in the primary system, I don't know. But certainly it's a lot less likely if the Supreme Court says, at least when it comes to federal elections in November, you can't do that anymore. So what's going on in California, we kind of saw the worst of it in terms of how destructive it is to the confidence in our elections in 2020, is that they don't even pretend to want to know who won on Election Day, which is, to me, a separate issue, similarly compelling in terms of being contrary to fair and free elections. They don't want to count the ballots on Election Day anymore. And I tell you this, and I made this point online as well. If they can't tell you who won on Election Day, then it's fair for one to assume the election is compromised. There's zero excuse not to get the votes counted, and to the degree they have excuses, then they should change the systems to ensure the votes get counted. Now, this isn't a question of they got 95% of the votes in and they need a few more days to the count. No, no, no. This is, they're not even barely through them, both at the state and in the case of the Los Angeles mayor's election, they're barely 60% through with the counting. I called up the most recent, at least as time of this record, the percentage of the expected vote that's been counted in the LA mayor's race. And this is now 3-4 days after the election. This is at least 3 days. And this number hasn't moved since election night, practically speaking, or the day after the 62% of the expected vote days after Election Day have been counted. In the governor's race, 56.7% of the expected vote has been counted in the governor's race. So they're now saying in California it could take as long as 30 days after an election for all the votes are counted. That's an abomination unto law, in my view, in California and under the Constitution. I think your vote, and you should be counted on Election Day. I think you have a right to expect your vote should be counted on Election Day. So this is the LA Times the other day reporting, look at this, still 700,000 plus ballots left to process in LA County alone. Inexcusable. And if I were President Trump, I would order a federal investigation into the handling of these ballots. That, to me, is an indicator that there's fraud afoot. It's enough to suggest there's fraud afoot. And there isn't any sensible person who's observing what's going on here who's happy about it. You'll see critics, frankly, you know, even the leftists are like, well, this isn't the way it's supposed to work. It's one thing for us to be able to count ballots after election or kind of, you know, hold the final vote tally. It's another thing to not even count the ballots in any serious or legitimate way. And in California, of course, they mail ballots to everyone on the registration list. and most of the ballots that come in are coming in via mail. This is another indictment of mail-in balloting. And as I keep on saying, Judicial Watch is trying to kind of salvage the system by enforcing the rule of law. So if your vote doesn't get there by election day, because federal law sets an election day, and I would argue California law sets an election day, it's too late. You're too late. And the mail-in ballots are less likely to get there on time, so you're better off voting in person under that theory. And I tell you, if you're not counting ballots on election day to let people know who won on election day, that is an indicator that there's fraud afoot and you can't trust the outcome. And most notoriously in 2020, you may recall, President Trump on election night had the votes to win the election in 2020. And that result only changed as a result of unprecedented counting of ballots after election day. So the results were X. Trump won on election day in 2020, and then the results changed. Biden won after they did this post-election day counting. So we've got it handled in the sense, at least in a significant way, with our historic, and I think we're going to get the ruling, God willing, because the ruling could come not literally any day, but effectively at any time between now and June 25th or so. The Supreme Court's expected to rule about whether it's legit to count ballots that arrive late. But I think the big question is, given California, in addition to that key ruling that's going to be historic, 14, 15 states count ballots late. 7 days that get in, not count ballots late, count late ballots. In California, they count ballots that arrive as late as 7 days after Election Day. Washington State, I think it's 21 days. Illinois, where we have another lawsuit pending, it's 14 days. Mississippi, the case now before the Supreme Court, is 5 days. Here in Washington, D.C., it's 7 days. In Maryland, it's 11 days. You know, and there are 10 other states that count ballots that arrive late. And now on top of that, there are other states that count overseas ballots and military ballots that arrive late. They're not supposed to do that. Election day means election day. But I think the companion issue to that, which hasn't been litigated, at least up to the Supreme Court yet, is, I tell you, if you don't know who won on election day, is the election compromised? Is it legal? I would submit it is, at least under, certainly in presidential races for sure. You look at the election law. I can pull it up, but you can verify that I'm correct on this, because I'm going by memory. It says you shall select the electors for president on election day. Well, how is that done if you're not counting all the ballots on election day? So this post-election day counting of ballots in presidential elections, to me, is violative of federal law. And then on top of that, a lot of this is caused because of the mail-in balloting, right? If you didn't have mail-in balloting, there wouldn't be a debate in any significant measure about post-election day counting or counting of ballots that arrive too late. Because, you know, if you're a voter, you can't arrive too late. But if you're voting by mail, of course your ballot's going to arrive too late now and again. So if you're voting in person, it's not an issue. And in California, what makes it doubly concerning, or triply concerning, or depending on the numbers, quadruply concerning, is they have hundreds of thousands of dirty names on the rolls. As Judicial Watch just announced in a new lawsuit, there are at least 873,000 names on the rolls that shouldn't be there. And these are names on the rolls that are, quote, inactive. They're still registered to vote. But because they take so long to get the names to be inactive, because under federal law, which we have been suing to enforce, we've cleaned up 6 million names from the rolls thus far, states still have too long to get someone who moved off the rolls. So this is what's happening. If you don't vote, you're supposed to get a card, and you're supposed to be removed off the rolls if you don't respond to the card or don't vote in the next 2 federal elections. So that's upwards of 5-6 years. Now in California, they're not doing any of that, and the names just kind of are there forever. And in some cases in California, there are 33,000 names that have been on the rolls who clearly aren't around anymore to vote for over 10 years. And the problem with that is people can register to vote, or once the dirty names are on the rolls, unless they're removed, someone can vote in their name. But because it takes so long to even put in that inactive status, so let's say I'm in California, I moved to Florida because I hate the high taxes and the communism there. They won't take my name off the rolls until at least 5-6 years later, unless I inform them. And in the meantime, they're mailing ballots in my name to the previous address in California. So when you hear stories about people getting ballots of people who lived there before, it's baked into the system. That's why it's so dangerous to mail out ballots to every registered voter, because every year registered voters are leaving the state, not telling elections officials. Elections officials don't want to do the basic list maintenance. So they're there on the rolls and considered to be live, active voters, and they're getting ballots. It's an invitation for fraud. And because the system is so corrupted by, everyone knows the dirty names are on the rolls, and people don't have confidence in the outcome of the elections. So we have an election crisis in California, and there's no one who's going to tell you otherwise, or anyone who tries to tell you otherwise should be considered to be either dishonest or ignorant. Mostly dishonest. It ain't normal. It shouldn't be legal. And hopefully parts of it will be made effectively illegal thanks to Judicial Watch litigation. So we've got the lawsuit to stop the counting of late ballots in California. We've got the lawsuit to clean up the election rolls in California. We've got the lawsuit before the Supreme Court to effectively outlaw the counting of late ballots in upwards of 30 states across the nation. If there's anyone doing more heavy lifting to make sure this isn't happening again and again, it's Judicial Watch. You know, so this issue isn't academic. They have a jungle primary in California, which means that they don't have party primaries. Everyone runs in the same election in the primary, and the top 2 vote getters, if they don't get over 50%, assuming no one does, they go to the finals in November. Now in Los Angeles, Karen Bass, the Democratic mayor, is so unpopular she didn't do what Democrat mayors usually do, which is to get over 50%. So she's going to face a challenger in November. As you can see from the current numbers, it's either going to be Spencer Pratt or Nithya Raman. Now, Pratt currently is the Republican. He's kind of pushing a big campaign. He's gotten a lot of news. If the elections were closed today, he'd be the number 2. But because they're still counting nearly 40% of the votes, he could still be kicked out and lose and be on the outside looking in November as the 2 Democrats, Raman and Bass, fight each other in November. Now, if that's the way the cookie crumbles on election night, well, that's, he lost. But I tell you, the process that, if that turns out to be the case in this process, after weeks of slow counting, I don't trust the outcome. That's the problem with this post-election day counting. You can't trust it. That's why no one really does it in other parts of the world. You know who won on election. I mean, we used to know who won on election night here in the United States. In 2020, when the election was compromised by that post-election day counting, it changed our history. The way our elections are conducted in a way that makes them incredible, meaning not credible, for many Americans because of this we don't know who won on election day crap that goes on in so many states and went on in 2020. Same thing with Steve Hilton. Now he's in a race against Xavier Becerra, who is the Democrat. Steve Hilton is the Republican. So Hilton's leading. So he's likely to be the final. He's at 27%, but we don't know. I mean, they don't even have 60% of the vote in yet. Now, Becerra could take the lead, for example. So he goes in the pole position while Hilton is second. Or Hilton could be in the lead and take bragging rights as the leading candidate for governor, at least in the primary, as a Republican in a big blue state like California. The point is, this is an academic, and we don't know the answers to this. And the answers that we're going to get are being compromised by this late election counting. That's the point. And the left wants all of America to go through this type of process in each and every state. That's their goal. I mean, heck, they're attacking Judicial Watch. They're now screaming about the Supreme Court potentially giving Judicial Watch this massive historic victory and stopping the counting of late ballots. And they already tell us that, oh, it's perfectly normal to count ballots that are forever, and we won't tell you who won for weeks. That's normal. You should accept it. No, 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 we don't accept it. It's not normal, and it's an indicator of corruption and fraud. And if you're going to keep on doing it, we're going to keep on pushing to change the law to prevent you from doing it or apply the law properly to protect us from that craven, quite obvious effort to manipulate election outcomes improperly. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.